We need to remember that agents eventually still remain just interfaces to the LLMs. So every time there's a request to the LLM, and the question is, what is the data, right? So all of these different means of context engineering, they're just about giving the right sort of path to choosing the right words to include in the message. And you can easily put too many things into the context window that the actual instruction gets lost. There are rules which you kind of shove it into the context window, whether you like it or not, right? You would put it into that Claude MD or into a must-use rule in Cursor. Those are mandated, but they take up context window space. Then you've got skills. Skills include, like Cursor rules, basically a tiny rule, like a little bit of data that goes into the context window for the agents to choose to invoke a skill implicitly. You can choose to call a skill actively, like a command, in which case you don't need those things there. But you can also, you expect the agent to invoke the skill at the relevant time, so you have to put a little bit of that breadcrumb in the window. There's some development right now, but maybe separating that out within the agents. Does it go and consult some directory? For now, that's the reality. And then you've got docs. Docs are just available information for the agent to find, but they're not naturally findable for the agent. And so you need to either leave a breadcrumb somewhere, like with a rule, or you just need to name them in a way that allows for greps and sort of other agentic search to find them. But they purely loaded on demand, and they don't have any price to pay. So you can have as many docs as you want. If you have 1,000 skills loaded, you might really cripple your agent today. But if you have 1,000 docs, they're just available. It's more about which docs that is load at the right time and can it actually find them. And it's a good time to remember as well that while it's a standard format, they are not standard models. And so the same instruction in the skill text right now would be loaded by different agents, by different models. Although we know, for a fact, we have like repeating data to show that the same words would not trigger, Haiku and Sonnet and Opus to the same action. Opus is much more of a kind of smart ass, right? And sort of can choose to say, no, I know better and won't do it. Haiku might sort of need more sort of detailed instructions. And so at the moment, skills don't really solve for that. They are one standard unit of context, but it's not sure that the same words will affect, will be the optimal ones for different agents. So I'd sort of say, think of skills as an amazing new capability. It is absolutely worth leaning into. We're doing that in TESOL. We think they're amazing. They are maybe the most sort of standard way right now to reuse context. But like MCP, I think they're also a piece of the puzzle. And there will be all sorts of sort of tools or just sort of helpers that we would want to reuse for making agents successful.
That's really interesting. So essentially the standard allows, it provides a kind of standard bolt fitting in the sense that you can integrate it with the agents, but your mileage may vary depending on which agent you use, because it will use, it'll assess the wording and it'll use them differently depending on how, of course, they are implemented in the background. So that's a good insight as well. Okay, so skills. We can use them as indie developers, as hobbyists, as open source developers. We can also use it as in an organization to describe how we want to do certain things in our certain methodologies and our certain processes that are key to our organizational requirements. Now, when we think about adding skills as a first-class citizen into our organizational process, our development process, what do we need to consider when building, owning those skills, and actually distributing it and expecting other professional developers in our organization to make the best use of that? What do we need to consider?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and I think kind of allure of skills is that they have this immediate impact on it. You create some static markdown file, you do it with a create skill, very, very low lift, and it helps. Like right now, you immediately can anecdotally see that it works. But I think just like with software, there are differences between kind of a one-time it worked and therefore it's awesome, and something that is a sort of long-lived assets that you now need to live with. These are competencies that you want to reuse across the team. So I think to kind of take skills to a professional level, to a team level, to an organization level, you're better served by thinking of skills not as a markdown file, but as a unit of software. This is a competency, a reusable competency that you want the agent to have. So this sort of puts a different lens on what are the tools that you need to be able to own skills, right? And to be able to operate them and collaborate on them over time. There are probably many things to handle, but I'd say the three to focus on is one, you need to be able to test skills, just like software. If you wanted to remain working, or even just sort of assess whether it works today, you have to think about what's correct and then test, or in the world of AI, evaluate against those. Two is really thinking about how do you distribute that software. We can talk about this more, but at the moment there's a kind of easy but sad reality that people are copying skills all over. They're designed to be reusable, and yet we kind of copy and duplicate and then copy everywhere. We've seen that movie. We know where that ends, so that's not awesome. And then the third is you have to think about how do you own them long term. They will fall out of date, just like any docs or anything like that. The models will change, and so a new model will come along. It will think it's very smart, right? Or you would want to use it with some sort of cheap model or open model, and so. We have to think about how do we maintain those skills, how do we keep them up to date, how do we allow a team to collaborate when the person that wrote them leaves the organization, and so the kind of the whole life cycle management of it. I think those are the core ones to think of.